Welcome to Kelly Minds Her Manners, a podcast about real estate and entrepreneurship with a twist. Here's your host, Kelly Robinson.
Hey everyone. So welcome to another episode of Kelly Minds Her Manners. He's back. Rich Cohen, best-selling author and Wall Street Journal columnist, is here with me again today. We had such a fun conversation that I actually forgot to ask him my Fearless 5. But you know what that means? He's just going to have to come back again. I love talking with Rich. Rich is awesome. Simply put, he has a brand new book out, his newest masterpiece, When the Game Was War. And let me tell you, if you don't know or like basketball, you will fall in love after you read this book because it's so personal and you learn so much about the famous players' early childhood lives and where they came from and growing up. And then, of course, you've got the intensity of the games. And he talks about the best season between 1987 and 88 when he was a teenager and the best players of all time. It's really cool. We also talk about disconnecting from our devices. We talk about the 80s. We talk about all sorts of things, and we just have such a great organic conversation. So I can't wait for you to listen to this show today. Please welcome back Rich Cohen. So Rich, thank you so much for being on the show again. I'm honored to have you as a guest a second time. I'm really excited to talk about a bunch of different things since last time we talked a lot about your dad and your last book about your dad, who was, if some of you didn't hear the last podcast with Rich Cohen, his dad was a top FBI hostage negotiator and a real character. Rich has written a lot of really good books. I think that one was one of my favorites. And you just wrote another book. I mean, how do you put books out so often that are also really good?
I don't know. Just keep my head down and keep working. Hope for the best.
How many hours a day do you write?
I probably write for about 3 hours a day in the morning.
Wow.
Something like that. And I get tired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're a morning person then?
I didn't used to be. I used to be a night person, but then my wife was like a morning person. So I adapted myself to her schedule. She ruined my social life, basically.
Oh, so now you go to bed early and you get up and write.
Yeah, basically. Okay. Otherwise, I never would have seen her.
It's a good point. Happy wife, happy life. So your latest book, The NBA's Greatest Season, When the Game Was War, I have it right here. It's awesome. You can find it everywhere. You can also listen to it on Audible. I personally prefer to read it. A page and feel a page in my hand. This is your fourth book about sports? Is it your fourth book about sports? Yeah, because you wrote.
But it always comes up like, so, I have the same few things I'm interested in. It seems like they're not connected, but they actually are all basically the same. And they're all basically things I was interested in when I was like 15 years old. Mm-hmm. So, I write about the basketball in the 1980s and 90s. Was the background of my childhood, and it comes up in everything that I write. Those teams.
Yeah, I've noticed that, and you know so much history. I mean, you obviously do your research, but I mean, did you know so much when you were a teenager about all of these players? Because one of my favorite things, aside from how engaging it was to read about the games in the season, was just the history and the childhoods of the players. I just found that to be so interesting and so in depth.
Well, I feel the same way. Like when I meet somebody new, I want to know where they grew up, where they're from, what they've been doing their whole life. And my father very much, I watched these sports with when I was a kid. He would always know a ton because he was the same way, I think, as a kid. And he would fill in the backstory. So I'm always looking for like a strange fact that sort of illuminates something in a new way. And I'm interested in them. And if I'm interested in them, I remember them. And it makes me see the game differently. That Michael Jordan played against his brother in his driveway, and that was his main competition when he was a kid. You understand them in a completely different way. Because I'm a little brother and I played everything against my brother in the driveway. And everything I learned about disappointment and the unfairness of the world come from those exchanges. So I always think that there's a whole religion of being a little sibling, and Michael Jordan clearly has it.
Yeah, and he was just happy to be half as good as his brother, and then he outgrew him. Because he came from a fairly short family, right? You mentioned that in your book.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. He's the second person, because I also ghost wrote Maria Sharapova's book, and she also, like, Maria Sharapova's parents are like the size of me and my wife. Okay, but Maria Sharapova's like over 6 feet tall. So you can't really, when you ask your father, where did that height come from? He says, because she needed it. Like, he thinks it was a very Russian guy. He thinks it was like Will. And Jordan, his brother, was like 5'8" or something. And so was his dad. And his whole family was basically average size, not super short, not tall. Jordan's 6'6".
Yeah.
And if he wasn't 6'6", he would be a completely different kind of basketball player. The kind of player he wanted to be, he had to be 6'6". So it's like a miracle. It is like he willed it to happen. I know his mom used to tell him, I can't remember, I think it was to put salt on his toes before he went to sleep, and it would help him grow. He did all the things little kids do when they want to grow, like hang from a bar and stuff like that. But I don't think anybody's found any shortcut other than maybe human growth hormone, which shouldn't exist in his time. Yeah.
Right. Or the hormones they put in the milk, right? Or the meat. Yeah. There were so many interesting tidbits, and I love facts like that, like about Magic Johnson dribbling the ball outside of his mom's window while she was driving the car, and just how he was always with a ball everywhere, and it was taken away and given back and taken away and given back, and just how much dedication so many of these people had, and how different Larry Bird was, mentally as a player versus physically than so many of his opponents or his teammates. And I just found it so interesting. Like, how do you know all of this information? Did you interview them? Did you study them? Do they have autobiographies? I mean, I am now, thanks to you, interested in basketball.
Well, that's good. I went and I interviewed as many of them as I could. And I interviewed a lot of people who are more like not the star players, but were on the teams, because a lot of times they saw everything happen as close as you can get, were part of it, but people that weren't paying the same kind of attention to them, but they were right there. I look for players who had a bird's eye view or whatever, who were maybe not the stars. So they had a little detachment. And to me, the great example of that was a guy named Sam Vincent, who most people now will not have heard of. He played in high school with and against Michael Jordan. Then he played on the Boston Celtics. He was in that locker room and he saw that team. And halfway through the season, he was traded to the Bulls. And when he went to Chicago, he didn't have an apartment for a while. So while he didn't have an apartment, he lived with Michael Jordan. And then he was in the Bulls locker room. So who's going to be able to get a better view of the whole story than that guy, more than any individual star? Yeah. Another was Artis Gilmore, who's a Hall of Fame player and was a great, great basketball player and the best player in the Bulls when I was a kid, when the Bulls weren't good. Artis Gilmore ended his career back with Chicago. So he saw the whole history of basketball unfold. He was from the American Basketball Association. And then in the middle of the season, though they promised him they wouldn't, the Bulls cut him. And he got picked up by the Celtics. So he was on both teams too. So those kind of people are very interesting. And then most of these guys did write memoirs or biographies, and most of them wrote more than one. And like a lot of people, so then there was that. And then go back and I read all the newspaper coverage, daily coverage. Every day they're being covered, most of which people will forget. I went back and I read all that stuff. And then I I read everything I could, and I read the big stories. I interviewed whoever I could. And at the end of it, I went back and I watched all the games.
Wow.
So that's how I do most of my books. I think of it as kind of building a rope. So you need a lot of different strands,
I love it because you are so detailed, and you watched these games when you were a teenager. You were 19 in that 1987-88 season. And so, you obviously remember certain things, but you're so detailed, and you're also like, it's also has like a really personal voice to it, which I love. Where do you think you got your writing style from? I mean, you also have a really good sense of humor, which I think lends itself to a much more personal approach to writing about some of these things?
I think I got my writing style just from writing. Well, it was a big realization when I was very young, because when I was young, all I wanted to do was be funny all the time. And I wanted to write something that would be, every line of it would be funny. When I tried to be funny on the page, I realized it wasn't funny anymore. Like, didn't work. So you realize that you got to like sort of convey a new language. You got to translate what you're saying, what you're thinking into words, which is different. So I think that whatever writing style I have is an approximation of, the way I think in my head and my voice. So one thing I like is writing where you can see the person thinking on the page, where they don't have it all figured out when the story starts. Maybe they're closer to having it figured out when the story ends. So like with this book, one of my questions was, why was this the greatest season, and why don't sports affect me now like they did when I was a kid? And it's harder for anything to hold my interest now. So, that's like a problem that you set out wanting to solve or get as close as you can.
Do you think that it's harder to hold your attention because the game was different, the players were different back then, and you feel like it'll never be the same? I read that.
There's so many different reasons, and I'm still thinking about it. One is basically you're now drowning in this sea of highlights and greatest plays and top 10 lists and plays of the day. And when you see them over and over again, it's like inflation. I would say it's like you print more dollars, the less each dollar is worth. You see more highlights, the less each highlight is worth. There was a real premium, like they were hard to get. Like we would go searching for bootleg albums. And if you could find some rare Rolling Stones concert that was bootleg, or some rare Bruce Springsteen concert was bootleg, you valued it, you treasured it. But if you could just go Spotify and just find it in 2 seconds, well, it's kind of nice to have the convenience, but you nowhere near have the same experience. So I think that it's how accessible. And when we're talking about this stuff, you can just go see anything from any time. It's like the dream, but it also kind of wrecks the experience. And then also, because of free agency and the way the game has evolved in all the sports, these players move from team to team to team. So there's no loyalty, there's no connection. I mean, these teams we watched Michael Jordan play. If you were a kid if you were 10 years old around, or I was like 12 or something when Jordan showed up at the Bulls, and he stayed there for 10 years or more than 10 years. My entire childhood, Michael Jordan was there in Chicago, slowly working his way towards the championship. And I lived it with him. And it felt like it wasn't a question of one game, one highlight, or even one season. It was like a multi-season project. And it's like a narrative in a novel. Like you go through it because you feel like you're working your way towards some kind of a conclusion. And that's all. Now it's all like a series of greatest hits albums. You know what I mean? There's no all-star teams. There's no team.
Yeah.
And because the players aren't around, they don't identify with the fans as much, and the fans don't identify them. And then also, I just think it's harder for everybody to focus on anything because of phones.
I agree. You have so much information thrown at you at any given time. It's hard to actually dive into anything and really focus on it from the beginning to the end. And I'm kind of likening what you're saying to when I was single and on dating apps in New York City. It's like, these guys have, there are more women than men in New York City. These guys have so many options. And I remember I was on these dating apps from I think maybe 7 years in between one another. I was on them once, and then I was on them 7 years later. And the same guys with the same pictures from 7 years ago were still on the apps, and none of them were committal because they had so many options. And I feel like that is how our society is with everything. Nobody can commit.
Well, it's like this. It's like, if you want to watch a movie, I have this experience. I assume other people do, because I find it always I'm typical. So normally if I have an experience, other people have had the same experience. Is you want to watch a movie, you find a movie, you think that's really good, but you can't watch that movie because there might be some better movie out there that you don't know about,
Exactly.
And actually, so I end up not watching anything. I end up just flipping around to different movies and watching the coming attractions, and then I'm exhausted from it and I don't watch a movie. So I remember my son and I went to a little house that didn't have cable, or we thought it didn't have cable. Turns out it did. We didn't know how to turn it on. We only had one channel. And because of that, we watched everything on that channel, and we loved we saw these great movies that we never would have watched. Now my experience I never had any experience with dating apps because I've been married for so long. The last I remember was in high school. They were going to have computer dating where they would choose your perfect boyfriend or girlfriend for you by feeding your information to a computer. I never got that matchup, and that's as far as I've ever gotten it.
That's really funny. Yeah, I don't.
That's how it started.
I haven't used them in years because I like to meet people organically. And then once I saw the same person's photo from 7 years prior, I was like, this person could be fat and bald now. And they look like, 10 now, so. It's
like when you go to the candy machine after a month and it's all the same candy in there. Nobody took any of the candy.
It's all stale. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so funny. You know what it's called? It's called BBD syndrome, bigger, better deal syndrome. That's what it is with what you were saying with the trailers and everything. It's funny you said that because I was at a friend of mine's apartment. He's an entertainment attorney. I'm a former actress. His brother is a famous voiceover artist. And so we were all going to find the best movie none of us had ever seen. And we literally spent 2 hours watching trailers to figure out what we were going to watch. And we didn't watch anything. I fell asleep on the couch.
Yeah, exactly. Because I thought that there's something better somewhere else. At some point, you just have to take the plunge, But like with sports, like for football, it's a good example. They have this channel where they just show scoring plays from all over the league. So just scoring play after scoring play. And that becomes very addictive. You never feel very emotionally high or low from that. It's just kind of like watching a parade go by. You know what I mean?
But you don't get the dopamine spike.
You got to get into the game, and like most watching sports and playing sports is mostly frustrating, and mostly nothing happens, and then something big happens. So, but if you're just watching highlights over and over, a lot of people, because they're playing fantasy sports, you never have that experience, and you never know what it's about.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I feel like that's with almost everything. I love your book. I feel like everybody should get a copy of it. I've read a few of your books now. I want to read all of them. And now I'll read the others that you wrote about sports, because now you've made me more of a basketball fan. So, and I wasn't before, but I just love the way that you write. And for anybody listening or watching, maybe you're not into basketball or sports or whatever, but this is just so personal and in-depth and interesting, and there's just so many layers to this book that I promise you'll be interested in basketball once you read this book.
Well, I'll tell you what I like writing about sports, which is I'm not a sports writer at all, and most of my books aren't about sports, and it's hard because people who read these kind of sports books, that's not what I write. Right. I like writing about sports because all this stuff, I want it to be like a nonfiction novel with characters and stuff. And all this stuff that people normally keep hidden, because people want to keep it hidden, is out in the open and exposed in sports, and you can write about it. So you have a guy, let's say, I never wrote about this, but a few years ago, I remember watching a baseball game, and there was a pitcher who pitched 9 innings of a perfect game. There's only been like 30 perfect games in all of history. So if he pitched a perfect game, he's in the Hall of Fame, his legacy, it's a big deal. And a batter on third base made an error, destroying his perfect game. And then the next batter got a hit, and he lost the game. And then after that, that's after 3 hours or something, he has to walk off the field, congratulate the catcher, wave to the fans, and go in the, that's like the law. Like, how do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he did it like so class, such composure. Yeah. It's like a lesson you could take for the rest of your life. Like when you do everything right and it still falls apart, that's how you behave.
Yeah.
He didn't blame anybody. He didn't freak out. He didn't have a temper tantrum. He just was like he just was like classy,
Yeah. No, that takes a lot of strength and character. For sure.
And another thing I like, and you see it in this season, is you take a player like I wrote about, like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who everybody's probably going to know, and he's 40 years old, and he can't athletically do what he did. He can't run up and down the floor. He's playing guys who are 20 years younger than him. And yet he finds a way to contribute. And in the big moments when they need him, he's there. And all these guys, as they get older, like Michael Jordan, as he got older, as great as he was, he had to change the way he played to be just as good as he'd been. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He could still do it, but he had to do it in a different way. And that's like a lesson I always take getting older, which is you can replace a lot of what you could do naturally with experience and intelligence. And you see athletes do it the great athletes do it all the time.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that's a great point for everybody to take home, because especially in this day and age, we always have to be pivoting and changing and adapting and working with our strengths, which might be completely different from our strengths when we were younger. And it was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, right, that passed on his hook shot, right? Down
sky hook.
His sky hook, yes. That to it was
well,
Magic
it's a big
Johnson.
deal because my dad takes a hook shot. He used it often in the driveway to make me very angry, you know. but my dad is like 5'11". He's 90 years old. He's not 5'11" anymore. But in basketball while wearing loafers and a suit jacket and still beat me, quite humiliating. But Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, you know, is like maybe 7'4". He lied about his height because he was embarrassed by how tall he was. And he would reach his arm out and all the way up when he shot and then jump and shoot it from the top of his arm. So the ball is like 13 feet in the air when he lets it go. And the basket's only 10 feet above. So he's shooting from above the basket.
Yeah.
Which makes it, and it's kind of a thing that it's not a 3-point shot. So it's not unclear if there's a place for it in the NBA right now. He passed it on to Magic Johnson, but it's such a beautiful thing in and of itself. It's like something you see, you know, in a ballet or something like it. It's like kind of a work of basketball art. So in and of itself, you could appreciate that he invented this crazy, unstoppable shot that you sort of just admire how kind of cool it was.
Yeah, and I love how, you know, you said that he was notorious for being kind of cold and not necessarily super open, and that Magic Johnson basically broke him by asking him to teach him that shot.
Yeah, he didn't really, you know, he was aloof. He was sort of separated by his ability and even by his height. I mean, you don't really think about the tall kid in class, but he's a kid who's like over 6 feet tall, like in grade school. Yeah. Which just made him kind of weird, you know, different. And Magic and he was much older. He'd already won championships at every level. And Magic Johnson just showed up like a young friend who wouldn't leave him alone. Yeah. Who wouldn't shut up. And finally broke him down. And he did it by asking him, would you teach me how to take that shot? And everybody wants to be, I mean, you want to pass it on. And nobody had asked him before because he was aloof. And that's just kind of what he needed. What I loved is Magic Johnson first met Kareem when Magic was like 10 years old in the locker room where he was allowed to go in with his like, you know, grade school basketball team. And the next time he met him, they were at practice together. Yeah. It was like a 10-year jump cut.
Yeah, he asked him for his autograph and he was kind of signed it, but he was pissed, right?
He couldn't ask him because he was like speechless in front of him.
Oh, I thought he asked him.
If you're a kid and here's this guy who's 7'4" inches, like a giant. Yeah. And he was a celebrity and he was his hero, so he couldn't even get the words out. You know?
Yeah. And, you know, it's interesting, you know, just backtracking a little bit to what you said about him being, you know, 6 feet tall in middle school or what have you. It's interesting because, you know, you don't always think about those things. Like so much about connection has to do with eye contact. And if you're that much taller than everyone, you're not connecting a deeper level.
I completely agree. You're like literally at a remove from everyone else in your world. That's you know, tough. And he's another guy whose parents weren't especially tall, you know, quickly taller than his parents. Another extreme of that, although it's only in relative basketball terms, is Isaiah Thomas, who I wrote about, who's kind of vilified. But you have to understand that Isaiah Thomas, when they made the list of the 50 best players in NBA history, he's the only one on that list under 6 feet tall.
Which is amazing. Yeah.
If you are that good and you're under 6 feet tall, you have to be better than everyone. You have to be better to be just as good. So like my father would always say, there's been a lot of mediocre 6'10", 6'11" players who made it to the NBA. There's never been a mediocre player under 6 feet tall who made it to the NBA. Everybody under 7 feet tall who's playing in that league is a great, great basketball player. So I always think, judging on the curve, Isaiah would be one of the best players of all time. The curve for height. But he had to be tough. I mean, he seemed nasty. People didn't like him, but he had to be that way to compete in that league where he was oversized by everybody.
So can you say, or do you not take sides or pick favorites? Like, who's your favorite of all time?
Favorite team or favorite player?
Favorite.
Well, my favorite
basketball
team is the Bulls.
player. Yeah.
My favorite team is the Bulls, and my favorite player would probably be Michael Jordan. I don't like to say it because it's everybody. He's everybody's favorite player. There were other players I liked in that team a lot. I liked Scottie Pippen a lot. And the fact that Scottie Pippen seemed to me like to have the temperament of kind of a sensitive person.
Yeah.
That in big moments, he sometimes got migraines. And he sat out a big game against Detroit because he had a migraine. And I get migraines. Okay. He's like an artist. He has a temperament of an artist. And the fact that he, at the big moment in Madison Square Garden when he wasn't given the shot, he refused to play. I mean, that was a horrible thing but it's so human, Yeah. And it's probably like something I would do, like have a little bit of that's what I'm talking about everything's out in the open. Like normally Scottie Pippen would have 10 minutes. He would get over his anger and do what he's supposed to do and nobody would know about it. That's what he would do in an office or something. But this isn't an office. He's told, here's the big moment of his career he's been waiting for. This is his chance to win the game on national TV, get the big shot, prove Michael Jordan is playing baseball. He's retired, to prove he's the number one basketball player. And Phil Jackson says, we're giving you the shot to someone else. And he has a temper tantrum. And it's right on TV. But so I would have to say, maybe for those reasons and my own role in my family and my world, I would say Scottie Pippen is my favorite player.
I like that. Because he's the most human and
because he acted like a human. He acted like his behavior I recognized from my own life.
Yeah. I like that. I like that a lot. So is basketball your favorite sport?
These different sports, the only sport I ever really played was hockey and, some little bit of baseball. I never played basketball. One, I'm not very tall, but two, my father was a basketball coach. And as a result of his belief in his own knowledge about how to play basketball, he became an intolerable figure for me on the basketball court. I did not want to be, even with when he was like 85 years old, he came to watch my son play basketball. It was terrible. And this was like a team of like 8-year-olds being coached by high school kids. And my dad just watching, and he goes to me afterwards, do you mind if I go have a word with the coaches? And I said, yes, I do mind. Please don't do that. Because he's a coach. And he wants to teach and coach.
Oh, so funny. That is so funny. Oh my gosh. And your kids also played hockey.
Well, my son plays hockey. Yeah.
You wrote a book about being a hockey parent.
Yeah. Because that was the most intense I ever had, as being a hockey parent, which is, people said he's living vicariously through his kids. I always thought it meant you made it to a certain level and then you pushed your kids to fulfill your dreams. That's what I thought it meant. So like Mickey Mantle's father was a minor league baseball player, but he never made it to the major leagues. Okay. So he made his son into the perfect baseball machine and maybe made his son's life a little miserable in the process, But that's not what living vicariously means. What it means is, if your son is good at a sport, you get treated better right now. People treat you as if you did something when you did nothing. And if you're watching, let's say, a hockey game or a basketball game, and your kid does something really well or becomes kind of the hero of the game, it's a better feeling than anything ever in the whole world that I've experienced. And it's such a good feeling that you should be deeply, deeply suspicious of it. Because it's like the only experience I had like that was when the Bears won the Super Bowl in 1986. That and my son scoring the winning goal in overtime are the two, same experience in a way.
And I think we talked about this actually the last time we spoke about the Super Bowl. and the Bears winning, right? And how that was such a big deal for you, but it wasn't as big of a deal as you thought it would be
Well,
when it
afterwards,
happened.
because, you know,
Yeah.
everything anticipation.
Yeah.
My dad used to say this other thing about negotiating, about like the threat, or he did a lot with the State Department, and the threat of violence is very effective. Actual violence is not effective. It's the threat. Once you've done it, you've done it.
Yeah.
And look at, you know, you've done it. And so the sort of it's all the stuff I'm talking about. It's the long lead up, you know, to the Bears, and the fact that they hadn't won a Super Bowl ever, and that they hadn't won a national football championship since 1963, and that they did the Super Bowl shuffle, and that they were beating teams in this really unusual, very violent way. And that, you know, the whole city of Chicago went down to the Superdome to see the game. Well, once it was over, it meant we had to go home and go back to school, and it was now in our past.
It's so true. It's so true. I think the only show, and this is probably not a good thing right before you go to bed, but the only show that I get really into, except maybe like once in a while a Netflix program or something, is Dateline. Right before bed. It's like asking for a nightmare. But it's true. Usually, like if I've got the TV on, I'm doing something else. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And
Right.
it's like
you got to try to not do it.
I know there's no attention.
Like one time, this was a bunch of years ago, my phone broke and I couldn't do anything about it for like a weekend. And it was like I got back from Hawaii. I was like the greatest weekend of my life. Like I sat in the shade, I ate some strawberries, I read a book, I took a hammock, I took a nap in the hammock, went for a walk. I came back like I didn't go anywhere, and I felt like I'd just been away for like 10 days in the Caribbean or something.
See, that's amazing. I wish I could be like that when my phone broke. When my devices break, I have a full-on panic attack just because, you know, as a real estate broker, 7 days a week, you got to be responding. And if you don't respond, you're like, you know.
But I had no choice. There was nothing I could do. So
yeah, no, I get it. And
yeah.
Sometimes you just have to give into that and realize that the world is not going to come crashing down in a weekend.
Well, there's a couple things you realize. One is if somebody really needs to get a hold of you, they'll find a way. That's mostly what I think. Okay. Second of all, I feel like we're built like to be in 4 years. First, second, third, fourth. And now because of the phones and everything, we never get below third gear. It's like third gear or fourth gear. You never get back down into the first gear and that can't be good for you long term, and it eats up your life.
Yeah, no, I agree. Do you do any sort of like meditation, or is reading your meditation, or like how do you relax?
I did some meditation for a while and then I stopped. I don't know why I stopped. Probably I got bored, which is probably part of it. I exercise. That's probably the one thing. And I read. I don't know. Pretty boring life, actually, but it's okay.
That sounds really good. You read and you exercise. It's healthy. And you're not only training your body, you're training your mind. People don't read anymore. They just listen.
Well, I think that reading is one of those things, like with my kids. I think it's important. Like it keeps your brain all wired up, you know?
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And I personally, I can't listen to like books on tape and stuff like that. Like it just doesn't feel authentic to me. I feel like I'm cheating. And
the only way I could do it is sometimes I can listen to an audiobook if it's a book I've already read and really like.
Yeah, there you go. I have to rewind and then rewind again, because I've tried to do it like when I had surgery and the only exercise I was allowed to do was walk. So I would walk for like 3 hours and, so I wanted to listen to something and I just couldn't do it. Like I like to feel the page in my hand. I feel like there's something more authentic about it. And
not that if you're walking, then your mind's going to drift.
Totally.
Even if it drifts for 5 seconds, you lose the train of the book.
Exactly.
And then you don't know what happened and you have to go back, or you have to never know. And that's why if it's a book you already know, that's why, like podcasts and stuff like it are much better, because you don't have to there's not like little Easter eggs hidden that become important later. You know what I mean?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And you're listening to something for half an hour or an hour rather than an entire book, which, sometimes like even fiction books, sometimes I like to highlight little things. I don't know. I'm old school that way.
Yeah, definitely. Well, there's definitely, I've had books that I've listened to on audio that I thought were really, really good. And then I stopped reading them. I went and got the actual book,
Yeah.
I
love
because I'm like,
that.
this is too good of a book to
I know. I
listen
have
to.
a good friend, and he's got one of the biggest libraries in Manhattan that I've ever seen, full of books. And all he does is listen to books on Audible. And he's always like, oh, I'm reading this, this, and this right now. And I'm like, you are not reading, you are listening. You are not an avid reader, you're an avid listener, which is fine. It's just not my jam. But I agree that it trains your brain. And, in the same way that like doing the crossword every morning is really good for training your brain. Or what does my mom do? Something Wordle.
I've never done it.
Yeah, I haven't either.
Talk about it.
Yeah, she's every day she does it. She's like, I'm training my brain. So I'm all for training your brain and feeling the book in your hand and turning the page and going back and highlighting something that you love. So what's your favorite book of all time? Jeez. That must be a hard question to answer. Yeah.
There's a bunch. A book that I really, really liked is this guy, Joseph Mitchell, who wrote these magazine profiles and stories about New York City. And he wrote them between like 1930 and 1960. Those stories, which when I came out of college, I wanted to be a fiction writer until I read those stories, and it completely changed my life plans. So I'd have to still say, even though I've read them hundreds of times, and they're now collected in a book called Up in the Old Hotel. But when I first knew about them, they were all out of print, and you had to get Xerox copies of them or get them in secondhand bookstores.
Oh, wow.
So there was something kind of like, it was like trading, ancient manuscripts around that had been lost, in the Middle Ages. That's what it felt like. Even though he was still alive, I was a messenger at the New Yorker. That was my first job. And he was still there. There was something like recovered treasure about his stories. And they were so beautifully written, interesting, wise, and very, very cool. So I would think that the only problem was I've read them so many times, I almost know them by heart. So there's nothing for me to read anymore.
Well, but obviously there's something really meaningful to you about them.
Yeah, they're very, So, and by the way, when I go back and read them, try to become a better writer, I think I get better. And then I read him and he still seems so much like the distance between him and me gets bigger, not smaller. More because I can see. Well, that's what I feel like, because I can see. And actually, he stopped writing at some point, stopped publishing, though he kept writing. It was a big mystery. And I think it's because his own taste became like so refined that he could never write anything that satisfied his own taste. You know what I mean? Which is, I guess, extreme kind of perfectionism.
Yeah.
But so that's why, like, you shouldn't try to write anything perfect, because you never will. And you end up just driving yourself. Everything's some version of messed up. That's what I think of.
Yeah, but isn't authenticity also something that's really interesting? Like, anything that's too perfect to me is just weird.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know if he was looking for perfect in that way, but
different way.
He was trying to say something he hadn't quite figured out how to say.
Got it.
You know what I mean? And he kept feeling like he was almost there, but he could never get there because you can't get there.
So what inspires you to write a book? And do you write multiple books at a time?
No, I don't write multiple books at a time. What inspires me is just something that catches my interest. And when I look into it, it's like the interest becomes bigger, not satisfied. It actually raises more questions and more questions and more questions. Mm-hmm. And I could see some kind of characters and some kind of stories. So usually it starts with something that interests, some random detail that I find very, very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I can see that you're really like engrossed in the things that you're writing about. Like, you're not just writing about them, like every detail is in there, and it's just so interesting. Are you writing anything right now, or are you taking a break?
I've been writing this column for the Wall Street Journal, so I'm focusing on those. So my last one was about Bruce Springsteen's 74th birthday. And then I wrote one before that connected to this book about the 5 lessons you can learn from Michael Jordan overcoming the Pistons. I wrote one about the fireworks we used to use on 4th of July that are now illegal, but that were incredibly fun.
Yeah.
And I write a bunch. I wrote one about malls, how important malls were when I was a kid.
Me too.
That
was the hangout.
That was the hangout.
That was where mom dropped you off and picked you up if you didn't have your license yet. Everybody
It was like
went
the
to the
first
mall.
place you were truly autonomous and free.
Totally, except that you had no money to go shopping.
You had no money, but you had your
didn't.
friends and you had nothing but time.
Yeah, and the food court. Totally. I think that's interesting. And your columns are all different, which I like. They're about
that one, it's supposed to be, it's ideas like stuff I'm interested in when I was a kid. Ideas I want to be able to, at the end of the day, I would like to be able to take all those, put them in one book and have it be a book about what it was like in America in the 1980s.
I like that. I would read that in a second because I grew up in the 80s too. Yeah, gotta love the 80s and the 80s hair. I mean, my mom actually, when I was 7, it was 1987. My mom allowed me to cut my hair short. I had beautiful long hair, nice thick long hair. My mom allowed me to get this haircut that I must have seen in like a music video. It was really short and it was half bangs when I was 7. I'm like, there go all of the photos for the next 4 years.
Yeah. Well, I remember I had the big thing, and I remember somebody telling me, a friend of mine saying, when I go to get my hair cut, to tell the barber, do whatever you want, just you're not allowed to touch the back at all.
I love that. That's great. And then there was the bowl haircut, but that was more like early 90s. The bowl cut. It was like 70s, and then there was like the modified bowl that all the boys had in the 90s. Gosh.
We had more like Anchorman hair or something, like a big helmet of hair. Watch old David Letterman. He had all those haircuts.
He totally did. It's funny. I was actually at Epcot Center last weekend. God, except for Guardians of the Galaxy, which is a really cool spaceship roller coaster ride, and kind of like in space. Everything is so dated, and it was like the same as when I went when I was a kid, and like we went on like the ET ride and all of the space ride with the pressure that like makes you feel like you're gonna pop, and it was all 80s. It was all a throwback to the 80s, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is such a relic. And it was actually like, well, I probably will never go back to Epcot because I think like been there, done that enough now, and I can only take so much of, amusement parks that don't have a lot of roller coasters. Yeah. But it was just such a blast from the past. And it kind of made me a little bit melancholy, just being on all these rides that I went on when I was like 4 or 5 years old.
Yeah. Well, you're causing memory in me, which was Disneyland, I think, not Disney World. Yeah. And I went with my father and my brother, and we went on Space Mountain.
Yeah.
And Space Mountain is a ride where you get off the ride somewhere different than when you get on it. And so the cars are coming back empty. So I say to my brother, just before we get on, why are the cars all empty? And he says, because everyone on this ride dies. That's my brother.
Oh, no.
Every time I go to any amusement park with him, that's what would happen. Also, he told me at Disney World, It's a Small World was a really scary ride that went upside down, so I wouldn't go on it.
That's really funny. I think Space Mountain at Disneyland is different than Space Mountain at Disney World.
Oh, I didn't even know there was one at Disney World.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. I actually lost my phone, and they had to stop the ride and retrieve it. It flew out of the pocket in the car. But yeah, the Guardians of the Galaxy at Epcot Center is like it cost $500 million to make that ride, and it's all like the AI and like the VR and the AI and all the technology. Plus it's like a Space Mountain, but a little bit faster. You go backwards and down, and it's all in the dark. Right. It was really cool. I have to say that's their only updated ride.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever actually been in Epcot. I've been there once, and we waited like 4 hours to get on a ride, and the ride broke down.
Yeah.
And then we didn't have any time. And then my father cut the line to the next ride, and he wanted everyone to go on. And my mom said we couldn't do it because it was morally wrong. And my dad said, we've already done our waiting. There was a big argument, like, we already waited. We spent our time. Yeah. And ultimately, it was a huge family fight. We had to choose sides. And so instead, we just went out to like an Italian dinner in the fake Italian section of
Oh,
Epcot, and then we
Italy.
went home. So we actually went, but didn't go on a single ride.
Yeah, it's funny like that. Epcot is like the adult amusement park minus the fast roller coasters because it's Disney, so you're not going to get a really crazy roller coaster. The adults all go to Epcot, like the people who live in Orlando and Kissimmee, they all go to Epcot and they drink around the world. So
Yeah, that's
because
what.
yeah, they go to each of the countries.
Actually, I went to that to the bar where they had it's always New Year's Eve. Now that it's coming back to me now. I went to a wedding at Epcot at Disney World.
Oh, you did? I've
In the
heard those are really
multi-faith
fun.
chapel with the it was actually the marriage of Larry King's daughter Kaya.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So you were actually close to that family, right?
Yeah, but the wedding was supposed to be outside, like unseasonably cold. So it got moved. A lot of very crazy, weird things happened. But anyway, never thought I'd be in a wedding at Disney World, but I was. And
Did
I
she
forgot
wear a
about it.
princess dress?
I don't think so. I think she was older. And I don't think it was supposed to be inside. It was only moved inside. It was supposed to be like some horse theme or something. It was like a ranch.
That's
But then
so
because
funny.
of because it was like 50 degrees outside, they moved it inside.
That's so funny. Well, I don't know, those amusement parks. We went to Universal and got the VIP tour. And let me tell you, it's worth it to spend the money to get in 12 attractions in a day and go up the back way and skip the lines.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. So, but Disney, I don't think I'll ever do again. But anyway, but speaking of the 80s, I went off on a tangent. So more personal questions. What's it like being dad of 4 boys, of all boys? Does your wife get the special treatment in the house from everybody because she's the girl?
Everybody's treated. It's like they said about Vince Lombardi. Everybody gets treated the same, like dogs. But no, I think that there's a big age gap. So we have a young kid, and I think we will go to Disney World with him pretty soon. Because what you realize is when you have a kid who is much younger than everybody else, you don't do anything for him. He just sort of tags along with what's for the older kids. I'm trying to make a concerted effort because they went to Disney World, to take him to do these things. When you have a big gap like that, also a lot of things that just sort of went zooming by, and you were just trying to get through them at the time, you now kind of really appreciate. It also starts to make you feel very old because all the stuff you could do with ease is now like a little harder to do, like only getting a few hours sleep and then having to go meet a bunch of parents and then having to go back to the junior. It's like also when you suddenly find yourself back in this grade school situation with these much younger parents, it's a little bit like the dream you have when you're back in high school and you haven't graduated,
Yeah.
It's like you're missing a Spanish credit or something. So, but it's mostly a lot of fun. And 2 of them are now in college. So that's really fun because I get to hear about them in college and I get to go visit them.
Yeah.
So I very much enjoy that. One time, many years ago, I did a story for Vanity Fair about Madonna. And Madonna started making fun of me that I had 3 boys at the time, not 4 boys. And she said that basically I was sexist for having 3 boys.
What?
And I said, I know, it's crazy. I said, what are you talking about? I didn't choose to have 3 boys. She goes, didn't you? Didn't you somehow choose that? And I think she honestly believed that you.
Oh my God. I used to love her concerts until like the last 3 tours, and then I stopped going. But That's crazy. That's just insane.
But it's perfect for Madonna. You can't tell if she really believes it or if she's just kidding.
Who knows?
If she's just messing with me.
Maybe she's just reinventing herself again.
Yeah.
And how's your dad doing?
He's doing good. I just saw him. I'd say he's 90. He's doing good. If you ever want to have him on, I'm sure he'd be happy to be on.
I would love to have him on. I think that would be great. I think it would be really fun. Well, I'm actually going to go back and read some of your Wall Street Journal columns because I am addicted to your writing now. And I really hope that everybody listening picks up at least one of Rich's books, because I guarantee you're going to pick up another one if you pick up.
And by the way, if you have any great ideas about stuff from the 80s that you were interested in that you want to share, tell me.
Oh,
because
yeah.
I'm a little locked into my own gender experience. I'm trying to expand it,
Oh, I will send you a whole list starting with Lady Pac-Man or whatever.
Yeah, that's what I need. I never was a huge fan of either Pac-Man.
No.
Miss Pac-Man or Mr.
Miss
Pac-Man, because it drove
Pac-Man,
me.
yeah.
Yeah,
Atari.
yeah, that's a good idea. I've always, I've been thinking about that because I always say like the video games weren't as threatening to us as they are to kids now, just because they weren't that good.
They
They're
also
so
weren't that
good now.
violent.
Right. And they just weren't that good. It was a squiggle of light running around.
That's
When
true.
I watch my kids play nonviolent games, like they play the World Cup soccer game, you can't tell that game from what's from a television broadcast of a real game.
I know, it's true. It's
Incredible.
crazy. And
Yeah.
they're so addictive now too. I mean, I don't play video games now, and I didn't play too much when I was a little kid. I mean, I would go to Chuck E. Cheese. I think that was the 80s, right? It was either the 80s or the 90s. And, you'd
Yeah.
throw the skee ball and you'd bop the thing on the head and you'd get a stuffed animal or tokens or tickets or whatever. I mean,
Well, what I
those
remember
were
is you get up, you want to play like Donkey Kong, because I'm a little older than you, and you have only one guy in front of you, and you get there and you realize he put like 50 quarters up on the machine that he had called for himself the next 50 games.
Oh my gosh. Or the tape decks that you stuck into the car.
Yeah.
Those like tape decks, you would stick them into the car radio so that you could play a cassette tape.
Yeah, you mean like the little thing that you could take with you when you left?
Yeah, you'd take it with you, but you'd stick it into where there was like a spot where you could stick in this giant thing that you would play a cassette tape in.
Yeah, I remember that.
Or the VHS rewinders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I once got my parents blackballed from a video store because not only was I late with a movie, I left it accidentally on the back visor of the car and it had melted.
Oh my gosh.
And they were in this long line and they got to the line and they're like, excuse me, you're not allowed to rent here anymore. And they said they were publicly humiliated. So like, you have the last tape you rented, which I remember was Real Life by Albert Brooks.
Oh gosh.
Melted.
That's
unusable.
Hilarious. Could you imagine? You know what? This is the thing that I loved about the 80s. And I will admit that I forgot how to ride a bike, even though it's like riding a bike. We had to find things to do and get in trouble and like cause mischief or not cause mischief. We had to like ride around on our bikes and be outside and do things that nobody takes the time to do anymore because everybody's stuck on their phone.
Yeah, well, it's too entertaining. It's just too entertaining. Nothing can compete with it. So you got to find something going on outside the house that's as interesting to kids as what's going on inside the house, and that's hard to do.
Absolutely.
I just remember everybody being outside all the time, and now they're not because what's going on inside their house is more interesting to them.
I know. I find it kind of sad, and I try to remind myself to really like take advantage of nature a little bit more. Like you, I don't really meditate. I can't. I do like yoga, but I can't lay still for shavasana at the end.
Yeah.
Like something's always twitching. But I do think it's important to get out and breathe fresh air and see green and appreciate what the universe has created or God has created or whatever you believe in, if you believe in anything, because it's truly majestic and amazing. And I think a lot of times, and I'm guilty of this myself, like we let life pass us by with all of this technology. And we're in an interesting generation where we didn't have it and then we did, whereas everybody now is born with it. And I know people who are in college now who had technology that we didn't have until we were in or out of college. And it's just so much faster and different of a world.
Well, think about the ChatGPT. I mean, they're trying to get kids to stop using it, but they're going to have to instead figure out something else because it's just too easy. It's too close. That's just going to be part of the world. You never really can hold it back.
I know.
I think one of the best things you can do for yourself is just walk. That's as good as anything.
I think so too. I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Rich. You are always a pleasure to talk with, and you always have so many interesting things to say. I think you are very funny. You have a great sense of humor. I love reading your books. I can't wait till the next one comes out, and I'm going to go back and read some of your columns because I just love the personal touch and voice that you have in everything that you write. So thank you. And I hope
Thanks.
we make this a recurring event that
Yes.
you come in
and send those 80s ideas along.
I will.
Okay.
All right. Have a good one.
All right. Nice talking to you.
You too.
Thank you for watching and listening to Kelly Minds Her Manners. Make sure to subscribe to the show and don't forget to leave us a review to tell us what you liked about the episode. You can connect with Kelly at Kelly Minds Her Manners on Instagram and TikTok or on our website, www.kellymindshermanners.com.